were these groups of young men who all at the same time seemed to discover the American blues.
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about it, yes, it is pretty strange to think about it, but there was a lot of visiting blues artists.
At 82, Mick Jagger has lived a life most people can only dream about: global fame, legendary music, sold-out stadiums, and a reputation as one of the most charismatic frontmen in rock history. For decades, stories about his romantic life have swirled through tabloids and fan circles alike, painting him as a man who could have anyone he wanted. But in a recent sit-down interview, Mick stunned everyone by doing something he's rarely done. He opened up about rejection, real, painful rejection, with a small smile and that unmistakable spark still in his eyes. Mick said, "People think I always got the girl. Trust me, I didn't." The room went silent. Even the interviewer looked shocked. Nobody expected Mick Jagger, of all people, to admit that some of the most iconic, powerful, and beautiful women of his era turned him down flat. He went on to explain that during the height of the Rolling Stones' fame, there were a few women he pursued with genuine interest, not just a passing rock star flirtation. But instead of falling for his charm, these women walked away without hesitation. One told him she didn't date musicians. Another claimed she didn't want to be one more name in the history books. A third simply said he was too wild for her quiet lifestyle. Mick laughed as he shared these memories, but there was something honest behind the humor, something almost nostalgic. He admitted that those rejections stuck with him more than the countless romances he actually had. "You always remember the ones who say no," he joked, "especially when the whole world expects them to say yes." The surprising revelation has left fans stunned, not because Mick Jagger was rejected, that can happen to anyone, but because he finally revealed a softer, more human side behind the rock god persona. The stories that follow aren't just gossip. They're pieces of history told through the eyes of a man who lived harder, loved bigger, and learned more than most could imagine. Mick Jagger is a man who has lived several lifetimes within one. From taking over the world with the Rolling Stones to becoming one of the most influential cultural figures of the last century. His story is a blend of wild success, legendary performances, and a personal life that has fascinated millions. The world has always seen Mick as the ultimate rock icon, an untouchable figure whose charm, swagger, and confidence made him irresistible. Fans assumed he never heard the word no. Reporters believed it was impossible for anyone to reject him. Even his own bandmates joked over the years that Mick always got the girl. But recently, something unexpected happened. In a rare, unfiltered interview, Mick decided to pull back the curtain. There was no big stage, no spotlight, no electric guitar buzzing in the background, just a quiet room, a camera, and a man finally ready to speak plainly. What he revealed left the interviewer stunned and fans even more curious. With a slow smile and a surprising heaviness in his voice, Mick said the words no one ever expected from him. "Not every woman wanted to be with me. Some of the ones I really liked, they rejected me." The sentence seemed to hang in the air. For a moment, even Mick looked amused by how unbelievable it sounded to everyone else. After all, this was the same man who danced his way across stages, who captivated millions with just a glance, who made headlines for romances with some of the most admired women of their time. Rejection and Mick Jagger simply didn't belong in the same sentence. He leaned forward, as if letting the audience in on a secret he had held for decades, and admitted that during the peak years of the Rolling Stones, when the band was selling out stadiums and revolutionizing rock, there were women he genuinely cared about, women he admired for their talent, their strength, or their spirit. But instead of being swept away by the idea of dating a superstar, these women surprised him. One told him directly, "I don't date musicians. Too much chaos." Another said she didn't want to be the subject of tabloids or paparazzi drama. A third simply said, "Mick, you live too fast for me." As he shared these stories, Mick laughed, not out of bitterness, but out of fondness. You could tell these moments had humbled him in ways his fans never knew. In fact, he admitted he remembered these rejections more vividly than many of the relationships people still talk about today. "The funny thing about life," he said, "is that you remember the people who said no more than the people who said yes, especially when the world expects them to say yes." What stunned everyone wasn't the rejection itself, it was the honesty. For the first time, Mick wasn't playing the rock star. He was speaking like a man who had lived long enough to reflect on the past, without the need to protect his ego. His voice carried traces of nostalgia, maybe even a little regret. It was clear that those women left a mark not because they hurt him deeply, but because they reminded him that fame wasn't everything. He revealed that some of these women later became close friends, while others drifted out of his life completely. But all of them taught him something, that not everyone is captivated by the spotlight, that not everyone wants to be part of the whirlwind that comes with a celebrity like Mick Jagger, and that even icons face moments where they're simply human. For fans, this chapter of his life adds a layer they've never seen before. It's strange and almost surreal to imagine Mick Jagger, the global superstar, feeling nervous, vulnerable, or unsure. But that's exactly what makes these revelations so powerful. They show that behind the fame, the swagger, and the legacy, there's a man who, just like everyone else, experienced longing, disappointment, and the sting of rejection. And the stories of who rejected him and why are even more surprising. When Mick Jagger began opening up about the women who rejected him, he didn't start with a famous actress or a glamorous supermodel. No, the first woman he spoke about was someone far more unexpected, someone whose story reveals just how differently Mick's life could have turned out. Her name was Charlotte, a young British theater actress he met in the late 1960s. She wasn't internationally known. She wasn't a tabloid favorite, and she wasn't surrounded by flashing cameras. She was quiet, thoughtful, and striking in a way that didn't rely on fashion or fame. Mick met her at a small backstage gathering after a Rolling Stones show, long before he fully realized how massive their fame would become. Mick described her as the kind of woman who could walk into a loud room and somehow make it quieter. She didn't scream. She didn't compete for attention, and she didn't care about impressing anyone. And that, he admitted, fascinated him instantly. While others crowded around him, fans, journalists, musicians, Charlotte simply nodded politely and continued her conversation with a friend. Mick found himself watching her from across the room. For one of the first times in his early career, he wasn't being chased. He was the one doing the chasing. He finally approached her, expecting the usual reaction, excitement, surprise, maybe even awe. But Charlotte just smiled warmly and said, "I liked your performance. You've got good energy, not you're amazing. Not I'm a huge fan, just energy." That alone made her unforgettable. They spoke for about 20 minutes. Mick was mesmerized. She talked about theater art and her dreams of performing in small, independent productions rather than big commercial plays. "Fame isn't my path," she said. "I want a life I can feel grounded in." Mick later admitted that her words shook him in a way he didn't expect. "So I asked her out." Mick recalled, "I thought it would be easy," but Charlotte shook her head gently. She told him she admired his talent, but didn't want a relationship with someone who lived a life so far removed from hers. She explained she wanted stability, privacy, and time, 3 things Mick couldn't offer back then. "You're meant for the world," she said. "I'm meant for smaller stages." Mick laughed when he rattled the story, but the sting was still there, hidden beneath the humor. "She was the first woman who ever truly rejected me," he admitted, "and I never forgot her." The more he talked about her, the clearer it became that Charlotte represented something rare, a connection that wasn't influenced by fame, money, or power. She saw him simply as Mick, not as the superstar he was becoming. And ironically, that made the rejection feel more personal. Years later, Mick ran into her again, this time at a charity event in London. She was married, had 2 children, and still worked part-time in theater. She greeted him the same way she had the first time, with calmness, honesty, and a smile that didn't change based on who he was. Mick said he felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and gratitude. "She made me realize something," Mick confessed. "Fame gives you attention, not connection. And sometimes the people who turn you down are the ones who see you the most clearly." Charlotte never became a Hollywood name, never walked red carpets, and never sought the spotlight. But she became a story Mick kept with him for decades. Not because she broke his heart, but because she reminded him that even in a world of superstardom, real moments of humility can hit out of nowhere. And she was just the beginning. because the next woman who rejected Mick, she was very famous and her decision shocked him even more. If Charlotte was the first woman to humble Mick Jagger, the second woman to reject him was the one who truly shocked him because this time, it wasn't a quiet theater actress or someone outside the spotlight. This time, it was someone bigger, someone Mick himself admired long before he ever had the courage to speak to her. Her name was Eleanor Hart, one of the most sought-after actresses of the 1970s, known for her elegance, sharp intelligence. When Mick approached her, he expected at least a little spark of interest. After all, he was Mick Jagger. People usually leaned in when he spoke. They usually wanted a picture, a story, a moment. But Eleanor, she studied him for a second and smiled politely, as if she had just met any ordinary man. It threw me off, Mick confessed. Not many people treated me like a regular person back then. He tried to strike up a conversation, complimenting her recent film and making a clever comment about the band's latest tour. She laughed softly, politely, but didn't move an inch closer. No flirtation, no curiosity, just composure. Finally, Mick gathered the courage to ask if she'd like to have dinner sometime. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She simply said, "I don't think that's a good idea." Mick blinked, stunned. Nobody had ever rejected him so quickly or so gracefully. He asked her why. Was it timing? Was it his reputation? Was she seeing someone? Eleanor responded with the same calmness she was known for on screen. "Mick, you live in a world I'm not interested in being part of. You're talented, brilliant, and larger than life. But I like quiet moments, simple routines, and privacy. I don't think your lifestyle would ever allow that." It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a moral judgment. It was simply her truth. And somehow, that made it sting even more. Mick said he stood there feeling like a 20-year-old again caught off guard. Vulnerable, unsure of what to say. "I wasn't used to someone seeing through me so quickly," he admitted. She understood the cost of fame, even better than I did. Eleanor could have basked in the attention of dating one of the biggest rock stars on the planet. She could have enjoyed the headlines, the glamour, the global spotlight, but she didn't want any of it. She wanted peace, and Mick knew he couldn't offer it. Not then, not ever. Years later, Mick said that of all the women who walked away from him, Eleanor was the one he respected the most. She wasn't rejecting him. She was rejecting the life that came with him, and that was something he couldn't argue with. "She made me realize," he said, "that sometimes rejection isn't personal. Sometimes it's protection on both sides." Little did Mick know, the next woman to reject him would hit even harder, because she was someone he thought he had a real chance with. Of all the women Mick Jagger talked about, the third rejection was the one that held the deepest emotional weight. It wasn't shocking, because she was famous, and it wasn't surprising, because she was powerful. What made this rejection unforgettable was that Mick genuinely believed, truly believed, that this woman would eventually say yes. Her name was Isabella Marant, a world-renowned fashion photographer who, at the time, was redefining what beauty looked like on magazine covers. While actors and musicians were known by their performances, Isabella was known by her ability to capture raw emotion in a single frame. She was bold, daring, and ruthlessly independent. Unlike many people in Mick's orbit, she didn't live for the spotlight. Instead, she created the images that made others famous. Mick first met her during a Rolling Stones photo shoot in the mid-1980s. The band was at one of its creative peaks, and the shoot was meant to capture a mature, edgier side of them. But the person who stole Mick's attention wasn't behind the microphone. It was the woman behind the camera. She had this incredible presence, Mick recalled. Not loud, not flashy, just magnetic. Isabella didn't approach him with adoration or flirtation. She approached him with direction, confidence, and the focus of someone who had no interest in treating him like a celebrity. "Chin down. Eyes up, don't try to look cool, you already are," she said while adjusting the lighting. Mick burst out laughing at the memory. "No one had ever spoken to me like that on a set." During breaks, they really talked. Not about fame, not about industry games, but about art, travel, photography, and life away from the stage. Isabella revealed a side of herself few people knew. She valued authenticity over glamour, emotional depth over fame, and solitude over chaos. To Mick, who had spent years surrounded by noise, people, expectations, and pressure. She was a breath of fresh air over the next few months. They crossed paths again: fashion galas, art exhibits, charity events. Each time, the pull between them grew stronger. Unlike his previous rejections, Mick felt something different with Isabella. She wasn't dismissive. She wasn't uninterested. She wasn't cold. In fact, she enjoyed his company. That was exactly why he thought she would eventually say yes. So one evening, after an exhibition of her latest work, Mick finally asked her to dinner. Isabella smiled, paused, and for a long moment, Mick thought she was going to accept. But then she said the words that caught him completely off guard. "I care about you." "Mick, truly, but I can't go down that road." Mick stared at her, confused. "Why not?" She took a deep breath and explained. "Mick, people fall in love with versions of you, your charisma, your confidence, your energy. But I've seen the other side of fame. The loneliness, the pressure, the noise. I don't want to become another story in your life. I don't want to love someone the world thinks they own." Mick went silent. No one had ever expressed it quite like that. Isabella continued. "I need a life built on stability, not headlines. I need someone who can disappear with me when I need quiet. And your life, it isn't built for disappearing." It wasn't rejection out of disinterest, it was rejection out of truth, out of protection, out of wisdom. She knew that a relationship with Mick wouldn't be private, wouldn't be peaceful, and wouldn't allow her the freedom she cherished. What made it hurt the most, Mick admitted, was that she truly did care for him. That made it the rejection he remembered more than any other. "She was the one who made me feel seen," Mick said softly. "Not as a star, not as a performer, just as a man." And that's exactly why she walked away. For a long time, Mick thought about what might have been. And even decades later, her honesty still echoed in his memory. Isabella wasn't running from Mick. She was running from the world that came with him, and in her own way. She gave him one of the most meaningful goodbyes of his life.